Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. You ready for another episode of my Bigfoot sighting? Alright then, let's do this.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, love's in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.
If you'd like to be able to listen to the show without ads and have full access to bonus content, that's an option. To find out how, please go to mybigfootsighting.com.
My Bigfoot sightings have all happened in Oklahoma. I was in Oklahoma and I decided to take a trip up to the mountains. And this was southeast Oklahoma. So I had a Jeep that I built, and me and my brother went off-roading here and there, and one day I like getting out on my own by myself and just leaving for weeks and months at a time. So I decided to pack up all my stuff and head for southeast Oklahoma up into the mountains. And first off, I went to a campground that was down at the foot of the hills in the Kiamichi Mountains. And around there, I started talking to some people and driving around and getting other people's stories. Of course, a lot of people looked at me like I was nuts. And other people were like, absolutely, we know what you're talking about. So I was up in the Kiamichi Mountains, just driving around for days and days, and I came up across this one guy. He was outside at his cabin and having a fire going, and I pulled up on him. And he was really nice. He was talkative and everything else, and I asked him about Bigfoot and anything that he may have seen around there, and he said absolutely. He said he even saw the balls of light coming down his driveway. And I went there a couple times, and one day he was talking about his Bigfoot experience, and he said one comes through almost every single night and slaps on the top of a rain barrel that he has on the outside of his little cabin. And I thought that was pretty neat. And I asked him, if you ever notice which direction, and he pointed off towards the direction of this other mountain. So I thought that was pretty neat. One day he was talking about, he was sitting at his fire, and he thought a motorcycle was coming up his driveway. And these driveways you needed 4-wheel drive to get up in there and stuff, or a motorcycle. And he said, man, that was a really quiet motorcycle, he thought. And it got closer and closer, and the next thing he knew, it was not a motorcycle. It was just a ball of light heading towards his cabin up his road to his driveway. And the first time, he's just seen it twice. The first time, he's like scared the pee out of him, so he went back into his cabin and didn't want nothing to do with it. And I think about a month later, because he lived in Texas and he came out there twice a year to stay for a few months at a time. The next time he was out there, same thing happened. So this time he decided to go confront the ball of light. And he walked out and got about 6 foot from this ball of light, which was maybe the size of a basketball, he said. And he gets within 6 foot of this ball of light, and it literally just stopped and went back the way it was coming from. And he just watched it go away from him until it got out of sight, that was a pretty neat story. So that has nothing to do with Bigfoot, but I thought that was a pretty good story to hear. So I went around up in the Kiamichi Mountains. I was up there for about 7 days before I saw anybody. I took every single little road that I could take. I had my Garmin Explorer that showed me every road that was up there, so I never got lost. And I really liked going off-road and as slow as I can and creeping and crawling over rocks and boulders and going through creeks and stuff like that, which is a lot of fun. So that was really neat. And I finally came across this guy that was at the top of the mountain. He was at the top of one of these mountains. I never saw anybody while I was out there. This was like over 100,000 acres of privately owned land. And how I got to go out there was I was looking for acres for sale. It was just vacant land, undeveloped land, and I found 40 acres in the middle of this 100,000 acres that was not for sale. And it was just in the middle of nowhere, 20 miles from nowhere. And they got a hold of the realty company, and they was like, absolutely, you can go out there. But they said, you need a 4-wheel drive, and we don't have anything to go out there, so feel free to go out there by yourself, check it out, and tell us what you know, what you think. And they said, but the only problem is there's no easement to the property, so you have to go through somebody else's property to get to that property. I'm like, well, swell, I'll figure that out. So I finally found the people that own the property around it, and they leased the property out to logging companies. And after making some phone calls, I got a hold of the logging company and asked them if it was okay if I went out there, crossed their land, went out there and looked at this 40 acres. And the lady was really nice. And she's like, absolutely, I'll let the men know that are working out there that you're going to come out there. And I told her the Jeep that I had, Jeep Cherokee, a green Jeep Cherokee. And she's like, absolutely. You can go on out there. You can go across our stuff. There's roads all over out there. And it's not public roads. It's private roads. And there's a guy at the mountain, at the top of the mountain, that opens and closes the gate for people. And if you come across him, just let him know what you're doing, and he'll let you in. So I'm like, well, that's great. So that started the whole adventure right there. So I headed out there, got all my camping gear, and I was ready to be gone for months. And I get up there and looking for the property, which was very difficult to find, and took every road I could think to take every time, which was awesome because if I just see a road to the right or to the left or dirt road or anything, I just took it and I followed it with my Garmin GPS, Garmin Explorer. And I did that for about 7 days, just looking for somebody, and I didn't see anybody. And on the 7th day, I came across the old man on the top of the mountain. And this guy, he lived there his whole life. He was about 70 years old, never had electricity, knew every nook and cranny in that 100,000 acres. And he took care of it for a certain family that owned all that property. And they've been buying property since the early 1900s out there. They bought the land off of a national forest. So they bought it off of the government because it was a national forest. And there was a few fire towers out there. And while I was out driving, I kept seeing this fire tower, and I'm thinking, I want to get to that fire tower, but I finally found the road to the fire tower, and there was the gate, and it was locked, so I couldn't drive up there. And I didn't want to go walking up there because it was a little too far. But this guy that was taking care of all of this property, because they had longhorn steer up there, and they would drop off a bull every year and pick up calves every year. And they had a whole bunch of females up there just roaming free, no fences or anything. It was pretty neat. And they had multiple feeders. So I got to talking to this guy, he was pretty nice, and we hit it off pretty good. And I ended up hanging out with him at his cabin. And this cabin, him and his brother built about 20 years ago. This was in 2020. So 20 years prior to this, they built that cabin. And about 10 years later, his brother passed away. And he's lived there by himself ever since. And this cabin was all cedar. And it was pretty neat. He had deer antlers hanging everywhere, skulls, cow skulls with horns, twisty horns. And there was just like 40 years worth of stuff all over the place. Old vehicles, old trucks, old trailers, just everything you could think of. If it broke down, they just left it there and they got something else, which was pretty neat. So it was pretty interesting checking out all the really cool stuff that he had and everything else. And we got to talking, and he's like, I asked him, hey, can I stay up here? And he's like, well, do you hunt? And I said, no, I don't do any hunting. I'm not up here to hunt. I'm just up here to enjoy myself and to see what I can see at the camp and to get away from society, basically. So I get up in there, and he's like, absolutely. And he had some four-wheelers. And he's like, well, I said, well, what can we do? He's like, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to go places that nobody's been for a really long time. That's where I want to go. That's what I want to see. And of course, he's all full of all kinds of stories. And I said, well, I'm just interested in certain stories. And I said, he's like, well, what kind of stories are those? And I said, I'm just interested in Bigfoot stories or wood apes that are around here in these woods. And he said, well, I can't say for sure. He said, but he had a cabin that was up on top of this other mountain that he lived at when he was married about 40 years ago. And he said that he had a few strange encounters up on this mountain at his cabin. And it just happened to be at that fire tower that I wanted to get to. That I just kept being drawn to this fire tower for some reason. Just wanted to get to this fire tower. And he said, oh, yeah, there's a fire tower. And I said, that's the fire tower with the gate? And I said, man, I've been trying to get up to that fire tower. He's like, that's my gate. And that's my combination lock. I'm like, that's great. I said, that's where I want to go. I want to go up there. He's like, well, he said, about 45 years ago, I was living up there. And this is before I met my wife. And he built this cabin himself, which was a pretty old cabin. It used to be a horse stable. And he built it off of a horse stable. And it was all cedar, of course, as well. Had an upstairs where he slept. It was a little upstairs room that you went up a ladder. And it was pretty old. But by the time I got there to stay, it was pretty much inhabited by every creature you could think of in the woods. So that's a different story. But he said, about 45 years ago, it's about midnight. And I heard a ruckus at the horse feeder, and he came out with his light, and he shined the light over at this horse feeder, and he saw three things standing there, eating out of the horse feeder, eating the grain out of the horse feeder. And he said there was a really tall one, there's a little bit shorter one, and then there was one about his size. And this guy was 70, and he looked like Paul Bunyan. I thought he was my age, in his 40s, but he was a big, muscular, 70-year-old man that lived off of deer meat and rabbit his whole life and never really ate anything from stores or store-bought anything. And did a lot of logging, and they had their own homemade sawmill out there, which was pretty neat. And he said, these three figures, he said, one was about, it had to have been 8-9 foot tall. The other one was about 7 foot tall, and the other one was about 6 foot tall. Bill was about He was about 6 foot tall, maybe 6'2". And he said, there weren't no bears. I know what bears look like, and these were no bears. He said the faces were black. They had orangish, yellowish eyes reflected in the light that he had. And he said that the biggest one just stared at him and grunted at him. And he didn't really explain the features of the face, other than a black face and black hair, blackish gray hair. And he said the biggest one stood there and stared at him, and he snorted at him, while the other two backed off across the field and got into the tree line. And once the other two was safe in the tree line, the biggest one walked backwards and kept his eye on him until he got almost to the tree line, snorted at him again, and turned around and walked into the tree line. And I said, well, that's where I want to go camping. He's like, you're crazy. It's like, I had one guy camp up there one time. He was up there for about 3 days. And he came down telling me that there's stuff up there. And he doesn't ever want to go back out in the woods again. And he said that guy went home and did not come out there to go camping no more. And I said, yeah, it doesn't matter. That's where I want to go. And it was somebody else's property, as well as they leased it out to another guy that did a lot of hunting. So he's like, well, I'm going to have to get permission before I can let you go up there, and camp. But in the meantime, you can camp down here at the creek and stay down there. I said, well, that's pretty awesome. And I stayed with him in his cabin for about, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks. He had 2 rooms in his cabin. I stayed in one of them. And this was about February. So in Oklahoma, the weather was pretty cool. So it was pretty nice. And after about 2 weeks of hearing his stories and stuff, and which didn't all pertain to Bigfoot, that was pretty much his only Bigfoot story. And he had, I wish I could remember him, but he had all kinds of stories about the hills over the past 100 years up there. And I went down to the creek to camp for about a week. And I was maybe down there for a week, a little more maybe. And on the last day I was there, because it was getting a little, it wasn't getting warm yet. So I was down there longer than that. So I was probably down there for maybe a month. It's got to be at least a month I was down there, because I was catching fish and eating fish and living off of the berries and stuff like that. Plus I had my astronaut shakes that I called them, I had a little generator and oatmeal, and I would pick fruit and stuff like that and put it in my oatmeal and make smoothies. So I basically just lived off of smoothies unless I could catch some catfish. And I ate catfish. But basically lived off a lot of smoothies for my blender. And it was about 30 miles into town, and I'd run into town once every now and then and pick up bananas and replenish my oatmeal. I had powdered almond milk that I would mix with water and stuff. And he had a well, and it was pretty much the best water you'd ever drink, coming from an underground stream. And I was down there for a while and watching all the wildlife, beavers. There's a beaver that lived out there. There was a mama mountain lion and a cub that lived across the creek in a den. I watched them for a while. They never came over to my side, but the track stayed on the other side. I tracked them down the creek to the other side, down to the bridge, and they killed a deer down there and ate a deer. But they never came over to my side, never messed with me. I saw them every now and then, but I mainly just saw them in the den and with my video camera watching me. The little one would watch me all the time. One morning I woke up, got up kind of early to go to the bathroom, and I came out of my Jeep, because I just sleep in my Jeep, and I had it set up so I could just sleep inside it. And I came out of my Jeep kind of early, and I spooked something. And about 2 minutes later, I heard a big old branch crack on the other side of the creek. I'm like, well, that's kind of odd because nothing really makes noise out there. If it makes noise, a predator makes noise, it doesn't eat. And if prey makes noise, it gets eaten. And to step on a branch or something like that was that big, it had to be pretty heavy. But I didn't really think too much of it. Just thought that was kind of odd. And after about a month of staying there, I went to another spot further up the creek. And this was Pine Creek. And it had a small cabin, but I didn't stay in the cabin because it was, of course, already inhabited by all kinds of different creatures. Those cabins out there, you can't see how the hunters stayed in those things. But stayed down there for another month, and it started to warm up. And by then, I went back to his cabin. I stayed down there for a little while. Never saw anything down there. Just caught some catfish, stayed down there for, probably about 4 weeks. And went back to his cabin for about 3 weeks. And he didn't really like anybody around, but he liked to talk, and he liked to talk to people, but he didn't like anybody around for very long. So I didn't stay at his cabin for too long. And about then he realized, after 2 months of being down there, he's like, you don't make a mess, you pick your stuff up. He's like, I'll talk to the owners and I'll talk to the guy that sleeps in it. And we've been having some trouble with people riding their ATVs up in there and stuff once in a while. So I'll let him know that, you'll keep the people away. And I said, absolutely. He's let me stay up there for a couple months. It'd be awesome. And he talked to him and he's like, yeah, they don't have a problem with you staying up there on top of the mountain by the fire tower and my old cabin. And I was like, that's awesome. And beforehand, we took a few trips on the ATVs up there, and we were riding, and we go all the way to the furthest part of this mountain. And we passed the area that he was talking about and kept going, went back and looked at this really old cabin that was like 100 years old. And on the same trail coming back, there was a cellophane balloon that was deflated, looked like it'd been out there for a while, and it was hanging across the trail that we came up, and it wasn't there before. I would have seen it because it was just shiny cellophane, and it said, "We love you," which was pretty weird, and I stopped, and I held it up to the guy, and I was like, "Hey, look at this. They love you out here." And he kind of just shook it off and laughed it off. Like no big deal. But me, I knew something was out there and put that there. There's just no way around it. And we go back to his cabin, and I was going for a walk from his cabin and just walking by myself, because most of this time I was by myself out there. And walking from his cabin, and I don't know, I was walking maybe 2 miles, 3 miles deeper into the woods, following a trail. The cattle had a lot of trails out there. So I was following a cow trail and came across a whole bunch of hogs. And I was like, I froze in my tracks because, I was looking for the big mama hogs. These were like baby hogs and junior hogs. And I stopped. Didn't make any noise. They didn't see me yet. And I just looked around and waited, to see if I could see the big hogs, because the big hogs would actually attack me to protect the small hogs, but I didn't see any at all. Of course, I got my pistol with me. I always carried a 380. And didn't see no big hogs, so I made a little bit of noise so they would hear me, and of course they took off running. I walked up about 20 more yards, and right in the tree line, on the inside of the tree line, a big old branch cracked. Just crack, really loud. And I'm just like, okay, now this means something. So I waved at the tree line, and I said, okay, I hear you. And I turned around and walked the other way and went back towards the cabin down the same trail. And about halfway, maybe a mile and a half, 2 miles, heading back, probably another mile left to the cabin, there's a hawk feather right in the middle of the trail, which I thought was pretty neat. And picked that hawk feather up and said thank you to whatever was out there leaving me things. And went back to Bill's cabin and got all my stuff and headed off to Flat Top, which was the name of the mountain out there. And it was pretty neat. So I get out there. He told me the combination to the gate, and he's like, make sure you lock it every single time. And it was his birthday because he didn't know this guy didn't know how to read or write, which was pretty funny because he had a truck and he drove into town every week, and he didn't have a driver's license, but he had a farm truck, so it didn't really matter too much. And never learned to read or write, never lived with electricity, just some 12 volt, but mainly no electricity at all. And never lived in town. He hated it in town, and he hated city people. He hated town people. It's pretty funny. But I head up to Flat Top, and I'm up there, set up camp, and rigged me up a shower. I had a shower up there. It was this U.S. military canvas bag that had a shower head on the bottom of it, and you'd fill it up with like 5 gallons of water, hang it in the tree, let it warm up a little bit. And of course, it was well water. You'd have to crank up the generator and let the water run for a minute so it didn't smell all eggy and be brown. But once it cleared up, it was really good water. Plus, I had a water trough up there as well that I'd fill up every now and then. But that wasn't a drink out of. That was for a different reason. Because later on while I was there, because I was there for 2 months up on that mountain. And like the first month I was up there, really nothing out of the ordinary other than coyotes. And, nothing really out of the ordinary happened. And I went on walks and stuff like that, not too far. And he had an old ATV sitting up there, and he's like, yeah, you can get it running. Like, you can ride it. So I pulled it out of the woods and got that sucker running, cleaned the carburetor up, and got some gas for it. And I got it running. And the first thing I did was head to that part across the field. I headed over there to where he said those 3 Bigfoot walked back into. So I go back there, and I went through the gate, and I'm coming up on this big briar patch dome, and you couldn't really see what was behind it. And I come around it, and all of a sudden, something, it was fast, whatever it was fast, threw up a bunch of leaves at me, and I ducked, scared the poop out of me. I ducked the leaves and, flinched, and then by the time everything cleared and I gathered myself and I looked, there was nothing there. So I was like, that's crazy. What the heck was that? So it didn't really scare me because I didn't really feel threatened or anything, because whatever it was just misdirected my sight to somewhere else as it got out of town. So I stayed back there, and it was about 50-acre area, and I just went completely around the perimeter and then, kind of zigzagged through the whole area and didn't see anything. Didn't see any tracks. Saw a lot of cool trees, a lot of cool burls on these trees, big burls, and that was pretty neat. And nothing really out of the ordinary. I get back to my camp, and as soon as I shut the ATV off and I got off it, a big old loud crack came from that area over there. And I'm like, okay, now I'm starting to understand. These big cracks are then telling me that I'm somewhere I shouldn't be. So I was like, okay, no problem, if that's what's going on. And didn't really see anything or hear anything for a while. Maybe another week. I mean, I would sit there every day and I would look at that tree line. to see if there was just anything different, anything out of the ordinary. And didn't really see anything. Didn't really notice anything. Everything looked the same. Nothing really changed much. And one night, it was the full moon, first full moon. And this was June already. This was June now. It was early June, first full moon of June. And it's about midnight. And I get out of my Jeep to go to the bathroom. And of course, I got my bright light that every time I get out, I shine it around just to make sure that nothing's going to come up on me. And I'm shining it around, and all of a sudden on one of the feeders, or it could have been on top of one of the old trucks in the woods, but it sounded like it was coming from the feeder in the field on the other side of the fire tower. And it slapped it 4 times in a row. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm just like, okay, there's nothing that can do that. A pig's not going to do that. A deer's not going to do that. There's something intelligent out there. And I'm just like, this is awesome. This is awesome. This is like verification that something is out there. And I'm so far out there that it would take a hiker 8 hours to get where I'm getting to hike there. And if anybody came up on a vehicle, on an ATV or anything like that, I would totally hear them from miles away. And there's no way out of that. And I know the old man is not going to come out there and mess with me that time of night, because he went to bed. As soon as the sun went down, he was in bed. And he was up at 4 a.m. every morning, like clockwork. So I knew, and I told him, I said, don't come up there and mess with me, because I'm going to shoot you. Shoot anybody, anything that comes up there and messes with me. He's like, oh, no, you better not shoot things. I said, I'm just kidding. I said, but don't come up there and mess with me. So I know it wasn't him, and he ain't going to go out of his way to do something like that, and especially ain't going to walk. He's not going to go out of his way to do anything like that. So I thought that was really, really neat. So the next day, I walked over to that feeder to check it out, and a lot of the tall grass was like laid over. So something was going on out there, which that grass was not laid over before, because I've walked around all those little areas every single day, checked everything out, looked for anything that might change. And really nothing changed for a while except for that night. And I thought that was pretty dang neat. So the next day I had crackers and other stuff that I would eat. And I took about 10 crackers and I put it on a old truck that was off to the other direction in the field, and left those out there for the day and put dirt around them. And I left it on the truck hood and I put dirt around them to see if, birds landed there or anything crawled up there. I'd see footprints or anything like that. And went about my business for the day. And the next morning I checked it, crackers were gone. Dirt wasn't disturbed at all. And I thought, hey, that's pretty neat, that's pretty neat. So the next day went by and I took crackers and there was more trucks, old trucks. These old wood, rusty trucks from the 40s and 50s sitting out in the woods, overgrown by everything. And I took my ATV out in that area because something just told me that it was right maybe 20 yards from the area that I had stuff thrown at me. And it was about 20 to 40 yards. And I put crackers out there on that one and put some dirt around it. And I did this every day, and they were gone every single day without the dirt being disturbed. Well, I ran out of crackers one day because I needed to go into town. And it was morning. And that night I didn't put crackers out. And this was morning. And I made myself a smoothie. And when I was done making a smoothie and I was starting to drink it, something slapped to the top of that truck twice in the woods. And I'm like, this is awesome. This thing's communicating with me, telling me it wants crackers. I said, this is great. So I was like, okay, So I went into town that day and I got more crackers. And that night I left crackers. And then the next night I didn't leave crackers because I just wanted to see what would happen. The morning after that, right after I made my smoothie and I was starting to drink it, just slapped the top of that truck twice. I'm like, this is really cool. So I was telling me, hey, it wants crackers. And then the next evening, I was picking berries at the berry bush that was not too far from that area. And the next thing I know, it slapped the top of the truck again. I'm like, whoa, it wants some berries or something. I don't know. But the whole time I watched the tree line, I kept an eye on the tree line to see anything change. And I really didn't see much change until one day, maybe this was towards the end of June, 3 weeks into June. And I'm watching the tree line and I see something black. It was really rainy that day. And I'm sitting in my Jeep just watching the tree line and I see something black in the tree line, up in the trees, probably 10 foot off the ground maybe. And it was a pretty big black mass, but I couldn't really tell what it was. And I got my video camera out. And of course, the video camera didn't focus on anything because of the rain and everything else. It was just focusing on everything around it, leaves and the rain and this and that. I couldn't get my video camera to focus on it at all. And the next thing I know, it stopped raining. And this was maybe 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It stopped raining and the sun came out. And because the Oklahoma thunderstorms blew over fast. And it was raining 1 minute, sunny the next minute. So it was pretty much raining all morning. I was stuck in my Jeep watching the tree line doing nothing. And finally the rain stopped. And this was like 4 o'clock in the afternoon and the sun was just going down behind the trees. It was above the trees still. And you could see the glistening of the water on all the leaves and everything. It made all the leaves shiny. And in that area where I saw the black, whatever it was, I see not shiny green, but I see shiny orangish yellow about the size of the leaves, like 2 things. So I just focus on those 2 things and I'm thinking, they look like my sunglasses reflecting in the sun. And then I'm thinking, well, there's somebody in the tree stand and they're watching me. So I go in the old cabin that's in there and he had some old guns sitting in there and some sights, some scopes. And the scopes were dusty and all that. I mean, that whole cabin was ridden with wasps and rats and who knows what lived underneath it. Had old pictures of him and his kid and his wife and all that kind of stuff hanging on the walls, and old pictures of his family. And this is all black and white. And that's how old all these pictures were. And I grabbed one of these scopes and I actually grabbed 2 of them because I didn't know which one would be better. And I go back to my truck because I want to see who the heck is watching me in the tree stand across the field. That was the actual area that he said the Bigfoot's backed into. So I grabbed a scope, I sit in my Jeep, and I propped it up on the window part of the Jeep, just rolled it up just enough to prop it up on it. And I zeroed in on these 2 things because these 2 eyes, these 2 orangish, yellowish things, every other leaf in the tree line were moving independently. When the wind would blow, everything would move independently, and the leaves would all move separately, independently, and these 2 eyes did not move separately. They stayed in the same area and would move real slow. So slowly they would go back and forth. and you would see two of them, and then real slow it would go back, and you would only see one. One would go behind the tree. And then it just happened like this. I watched it for like 20 minutes before I even got the scope to see what the heck it was, because I was like making sure that that's what was going on. And then, of course, I remembered that there were scopes in there. My camera wouldn't get a focus on anything. I had a video camera, a digital video camera that had 800 times zoom, that I could literally zoom in on a mountain from the top of another mountain. I could zoom in on the top of another mountain and see it crystal clear, and of rocks and trees and leaves and everything, but it would not focus on this thing at all. So I couldn't really tell, but I could tell it was something. And someone, I thought, was in the tree stand. So after I got the scope and I got it focused, I was just, my jaw dropped. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, it's actually happening. This is actually happening. The scope, I could see it plain as day. I could see like it was 10 feet in front of me. I could see every little detail of its face. I could see every little detail. It had one hand holding itself up on the tree. And this was a crooked tree. So this tree had like a crook in it, and that's how it stood on it. And it held itself in place with one hand, and it had 3 fingers and no thumb around, just had the 3 fingers around the tree. And at first I saw its face, and honestly, I don't know if you know who John Amos is, of Good Times back in the 70s. But the face almost looked like that, but way darker. It was like a bluish black face, a human nose, but flat, big, orangish, yellowish eyes. It had a forehead that was kind of, like the thing. It had a forehead that was pretty thick and some big eyebrows. And the cheekbones, it had prominent cheekbones. The cheekbones protruded out. You could see the wrinkles on either side of his eye. And it could have been her, may have been a her, I'm not sure. And the face, you could see the bluish black skin of the face. It had a wide mouth with really thick lips, but his mouth was closed. And the chin wasn't very big, not very big chin, it's just wide. And no neck, of course, and then it just went to hair. So, and above its, about halfway up its forehead, was black hair, really nice black hair. It wasn't matted. It was really sleek and nice, kind of like my husky. It just had really nice black hair. It looked like it was well groomed. And I followed the arm. It had a really thick arm. I followed its arm to its elbow and then to its hand. And its hand, I could see the perfect wrinkles. I could see the fingernails. I could see it just had human hands. Same wrinkles as we got in our knuckles and everything. It just had a bluish black skin and black hair. And I readjusted for a second because my eyes were getting tired. It just took me like 30 minutes of looking at this thing. I just was in awe of looking at this thing. And I readjusted my eye and focused back in on it again, and it kind of switched up. And now its whole hand and thumb was around the tree. So I could see the thumb, I could see all 4 fingers, and I could see where its hand was bare, bluish black hand color, and at the wrist, that's where the hair started, was at the wrist. And I followed the arm up. The chest was brownish, so I don't know if it had a baby. It's possible it was holding a baby because the chest was brownish, so I couldn't really see the chest. There was a brownish red hair on the chest, which didn't match the rest of it. And, I watched this thing, and it watched me for until the sun went down. I just couldn't take my eyes off it. And it was watching me. So it watched me probably in this tree every single day while I was out there. I just didn't notice it, I just didn't, it looked normal. And I couldn't focus on it. But once the sun, just that day, I was in the right spot at the right time. When the sun hit the tree line just right, I could see its eyes reflecting in the sun. And this happened every single day up until July 6th. And it got up to like 116 degrees. And I was filling this water trough up full of 72-degree water and soaking in this tub halfway through the day just to bring my body temperature down every single day. And every day it ate crackers. And if I didn't leave the crackers, it would slap the top of that truck. And I would bring it berries and leave crackers, leave oatmeal for it. I would leave bananas. It liked bananas. It would eat bananas every single time, which was really neat. And this happened every single day for about 2 to 3 weeks. It was in that tree watching me every single day. And I would sit there and I would watch it every single day. But it didn't change. It stayed in that tree. I never saw its teeth. I would see its face, and sometimes half of its face would go behind the tree, and then it would come back out, and I'd see the full face. See its hand every single time. It had no neck. It kind of had a pointy head, but not really pointy. But it definitely had no neck, and it was big. It was definitely bigger than any human being that I've ever seen in my life. But it finally got too hot, and it was July 6th, and it was the last day I was there, the last night I was going to be there, because I had to get out of there because it was just too hot. Got up to 116 degrees there. And the last day, in the evening, I was talking to it, and I would talk to it every evening. When it was up in that tree, I would talk to it, and I would try to get it to make some kind of noise or come out of where it was so I could see it better. But it never did. It would never let me fully see the whole thing. I could just see half of it. But what I could see, it was definitely like a wood ape. But it was a human features in the face, completely human. Not quite human eyes, but human features in the face, human hands, but black hair, really sleek black hair. The last day I was there on July 6th, I was looking off to the left, over towards where it would slap the truck. And I saw it. There was a black background, and then all of a sudden it was a green background. So I saw it move from the open to behind a tree. So I started talking to it, and I was like, hey, this is the last day I'm going to be here. Can you please just say something, talk to me, make some kind of noise? And just as I said that, all of a sudden I heard a coyote call, I heard a pig squeal, and then I heard a baby coyote noise. And I assume that that's the only noises it could have made, if that was that. But that time of day, the coyotes were out, and the pigs were definitely not around there. Because when you saw the pigs, they were huge. They were like 4 foot at their back. They were big. They were some big pigs. So that was pretty much the experience, and I never felt threatened at any time. I was just in awe and just completely enlightened that all the Bigfoot things that I've watched through my whole life, and the dream that I had when I was a kid, of a Bigfoot seeing a Bigfoot on the other side of a field across this green grass that scared the poop out of me when I was a kid. I would be like walking towards this field, and as I'm entering the field, on the other side of the field, this big, huge Bigfoot, blackish brown Bigfoot, comes out of the field, and I see it, and it sees me, and then of course I wake up every single time. I had that dream a couple times when I was a kid. But, oh yeah, I used to watch Boggy Creek, everything you could think of. And one time in Washington, I lived in Washington State, we just moved on to this 16 acres, and this was 20 miles out of town. And we cleared about an acre, put our mobile home on it, and probably a week or two into living there, and this was at night, and I was about 12 years old. And of course, my mom was asleep, but I was awake, and this was 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. I don't know what time it was. I just know it was dark, and it woke me up. It was this god-awful howl that just was loud and long. It scared my dog. Our other 3 dogs would not come out of the doghouse. It scared them. And later on, in the 90s, when the internet came out, I started looking up Bigfoot howls and Bigfoot sounds and stuff like that. And I found the Tacoma, Washington howler. And they just put this housing development up in Tacoma in the woods. And something up in the woods would howl down every night at this housing development. And it was the exact same howl. It was crazy. Gave me chills. But that was pretty neat when I figured that out. And the internet coming out was awesome. So I did nothing but research on Bigfoot and everything else. And all this led me to go to Southeast Oklahoma and have my experience there, which was, I mean, the most enlightening thing. Of course, I want to go back in the woods as much as possible. Doesn't scare me from not wanting to go into the woods. I mean, sooner or later, maybe I might have a bad experience with one, but that was definitely not a bad experience with a Bigfoot. That was a very curious Bigfoot. And it was really, really neat. And I possibly had one more experience with the Bigfoot, and this was in Florida, in Inverness, Florida. And I was camping there. And I was there for about 2 weeks. And I camped by myself. And this was Flying Eagle Preserve in Florida. And about 4 o'clock in the morning, something was throwing rocks at my tent. And it would hit the top of the rock and roll, or the tent, and roll down. And this happened for about 30 minutes. I just sit there and listen to it. And finally I was like, hey, I'm trying to sleep in here. Can you stop? And it literally stopped. And I was just like, that's weird. That's pretty odd. And this was probably one of my first experiences. And I got up in the morning, and there was the biggest pea spot outside my tent that I think I've ever seen. It was at least 3 foot in diameter. And there was a stick in the middle of it. I picked it up and smelled the stick to see what it was, because the rest of the ground was dry. It didn't rain that night, and it was pee. It was pretty stinky pee. And that was about the time COVID came out. And the next day, the park ranger came out and told me that I was supposed to be out there for another month camping. And the ranger came out there and said that everybody had to go back to the city, that they were closing all the nature preserves and everything else, and that I had to leave by morning. The next morning, I actually had to leave. And I was like, you're kidding me. This is terrible. And I don't want to go back to the city. I just might have had a Bigfoot experience. So that was the beginning of my first one. And they made me leave. So I had to get out of there. And so I didn't go any further with that. But absolutely, I'm going back to Oklahoma pretty soon, and I'm going back to that area. I'm going to buy some land up there, and I'm going to get pictures, and I'm going to interact as much as I can and see them as much as I can back there. I really can't wait, and it'll be really neat. I really can't wait. My brother, he's so mad at me for not getting pictures because my camera and my video camera would not focus on it. It would not focus on it, which was weird. Focus on everything else, but it wouldn't focus on it. My cousin, he's like, I believe you, but I want to see something. I'll believe it when I see it. So, I hope this was a good enough detail, but that's about the best my brain can do, my recollection can do, really. It was the greatest experience of my life, I think. I wasn't scared. It didn't deter me from wanting to go into the woods anymore. It made me want to go into the woods more, basically. Might sound dumb, I don't know, but that's pretty much the end of the story. It was pretty awesome.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let us know. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.
Seen a bunch of rundown, no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves and the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah, the sound of a memory brings me back to the bluegrass playing on my dad's 8-track. It's Pickup Man had been through it, getting through the day on Scruggs and Skags, booking hay bales to those Tennessee jams. There's no other way that I'd do it. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Somebody calling backwards in double time, getting to the soul and the drumming, look Kentucky style. Those are the anthems strumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Pace of the city life drives me wild. The only tune is the cars rushing by, with the bass on the stereos booming. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Somebody going backwards in double time, getting to the soul and the drumming, low Kentucky style. Those are the anthems strumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Somebody going backwards in double time, getting to the soul and the drumming, low Kentucky style. Those are the anthems drumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm, ride chicken porch swing, mama's best sweet tea kind of sound.